Imagine a steel behemoth rolling through the mud, its 120mm gun roaring like thunder. It's not just another tank, it's a machine that's rewriting the rules of armored warfare. And even Washington is stunned by how Ukraine is using it. This isn't just a story about metal and firepower. This is a story about strategy, grit, and how a handful of tanks is turning the tide against the world's largest mechanized army. Because what Ukraine has done with its Challenger tanks isn't just surprising, it's forcing military analysts in the United States and across NATO to rethink how heavy armor fights in the 21st century. But the twist? It isn't just the hardware, it's how Ukraine is using it. You're about to discover the battlefield secrets of a strategy that's been killing Russian armored columns in ways Moscow never saw coming. Before we go deeper, imagine the battlefield from a Russian tank commander's point of view. You expect defensive lines, entrenched infantry, maybe artillery barrages. What you don't expect is precision engagement from 3 kilometers away, delivered by tanks that weren't even designed for this kind of static trench warfare until now. And that single shift from static defense to mobile, intelligent engagement is what makes this strategy so devastating. Let's start where it all began. For decades, the Challenger 2 was a symbol of Western heavy armor, incredibly well protected, with thick armor and a rifled gun designed for accuracy at long range. But it wasn't widely considered a battlefield game-changer in modern warfare. That was supposed to be the domain of air power, drones, and anti-tank missiles. Ukraine changed that. In 2022, Britain supplied Ukraine with 14 Challenger 2 tanks, a small battalion by conventional standards. Critics scoffed. Just 14 tanks against Russia? Hardly enough to shift a front line. But Ukraine saw something others didn't. Instead of throwing the tanks into predictable armored charges, Ukraine integrated them into a combined arms strategy, using them as long-range precision shooters supported by drones, electronic warfare, infantry teams, and artillery. The result? Russia's armored columns, once feared across battlefields from Chechnya to Syria, began suffering losses at unprecedented ranges. Ukrainian crews reported hitting targets beyond 3 kilometers with surgical precision, distances that would have been unheard of just a few years ago with old Soviet armor. Here's where the strategy gets really smart. Ukraine doesn't try to slug it out head-to-head with Russian armor. They use Challengers the way snipers use rifles. They fight from cover, they engage at long range, they disappear before the enemy can respond. They exploit terrain intelligence provided by drones. This sudden shift in tactics flipped a decades-old assumption about armored warfare on its head. Conventional wisdom said that tanks were obsolete in the age of drones and precision missiles. Ukraine proved the opposite. By using Challenger tanks as mobile precision platforms, Ukrainian forces began punching holes, not just in Russian armor, but in the Russian psyche. Russian commanders, long accustomed to dictating terms at the front, suddenly found their own vehicles being defeated at distances where they couldn't even return fire effectively. Here's a real battlefield example. On the Kursk axis, Ukrainian Challenger crews described their tanks as sniper rifles among tanks, capable of engaging from unexpected positions, firing accurately, then ducking back into concealment. This shift matters because Russia's own armored doctrine still emphasizes massed tank assaults, pushing forward in columns with artillery and infantry in tow. That works when you have air superiority and control of the battlefield. Ukraine, on the other hand, blends Western armor, unmanned systems, and deep battlefield awareness, turning each Challenger into an information-enabled precision shooter. And it's not theoretical. Open-source battlefield footage shows Ukrainian Challengers firing from tree lines, engaging dug-in Russian formations at ranges over a mile away, using their superior optics and fire control to knock out targets before Russian tanks even know what hit them. For the Russians, this has created a nightmare. Imagine advancing with your tanks and suddenly taking hits from directions you didn't expect at distances you didn't think possible by enemy tanks you assumed would be outmatched. The psychological impact is enormous. Even Russian propaganda and defense industry leaders have tried to dismiss the Challenger's effectiveness, calling it overrated or inferior to Russian designs. But battlefield performance tells a different story. Staff officers in Washington and London are quietly acknowledging what Ukrainian tank crews have been saying for months. These tanks, when integrated into the right strategy, have killed Russian armor far more effectively than anyone predicted. U.S. analysts have been particularly surprised by how well Ukraine has leveraged these heavy tanks without full NATO air superiority or conventional Western support structures. That's because Ukraine isn't fighting like NATO, it's fighting smarter. Instead of relying solely on aerial reconnaissance or air support, Ukraine uses a sprawling mesh of modern drones and signals intelligence to identify enemy targets and feed real-time data directly to armored crews. That's a battlefield advantage the Russians never adapted to. But this strategy has another killer advantage. It maximizes every single tank Ukraine possesses. You see, 14 tanks don't sound like much until you realize that in the right hands and with the right tactics, a handful of heavy armored vehicles can lethalize dozens of enemy armor without being destroyed in return. That's force multiplication. For Moscow, accustomed to bleeding through tanks in frontal assaults, this is devastating. When a Russian T-90 or BMP column moves forward, it expects to suppress Ukrainian fire with massed machine guns, artillery, and armor. Instead, it gets taken out by precision fire supported by drones, infantry spotters, and terrain advantage. Russian losses mount, and the column halts. That's not just tactical success, that's operational disruption. Now, let's talk about the technology that makes this possible. The Challenger isn't just heavily armored, it's accurate. Its 1,200mm rifled gun, paired with modern fire control systems, allows Ukrainian crews to launch rounds with pinpoint precision. Trials show that a properly trained crew can score hits at distances where Russian fire control begins to struggle. More than that, the tank's armor and survivability give its crew confidence in defensive positions. They're not just shooting, they're living to reposition and fire again. But even the best strategy has risks. Russian forces have adapted with their own lethal tools, most notably small, cheap drones that strike from above and advanced anti-tank missiles. Several Challenger tanks have been damaged or lost to FPV drones and loitering munitions, a stark reminder that even the best heavy armor can't operate without protection in a 21st century battlefield. And losses, even limited ones, are politically sensitive. But here's the nuance. Even when a Challenger is hit, it's not always a kill. Many times, crews have survived and damaged tanks have been repaired and returned to the fight. That's a testament to both the tank's protection and Ukraine's determination to keep them operational. This isn't just about steel versus steel anymore. It's about integration. Ukraine's battlefield network ties together heavy armor with drones, electronic warfare teams, and long-range artillery, a system that finds, fixes, and finishes targets faster than the Russians can react. That's the real lesson the United States and NATO are taking notice of. Years ago, Western militaries worried that heavy tanks were obsolete. Drones, missiles, and asymmetric tactics would make them relics. But Ukraine's battlefield narrative has proven tanks aren't obsolete, they just have to be smarter. Modern warfare isn't about the biggest guns anymore. It's about information dominance, knowing where your enemy is before they know where you are, and exploiting that relentlessly. Ukraine's Challenger tank strategy captures this shift perfectly. Instead of massed armored charges, Ukrainian crews move in small, unpredictable patterns supported by drone surveillance. They engage, kill armored targets, then relocate before Russian artillery can catch up. That's why even U.S. military planners, traditionally conservative about armored warfare, are studying Ukraine's approach with keen interest. Because what Ukraine has done isn't just tactical evolution, it's doctrinal innovation. Now, let's zoom out to the bigger picture. Russia's losses, both in tanks and morale, matter. Russia's mechanized formations have struggled to maintain momentum because every armored column risks being shredded before it reaches its objective. And every time a Russian tank falls long before contact, it chips away at confidence in Moscow's strategy. Meanwhile, Ukraine's success with Challengers and integrated armaments gives Kyiv something far more valuable than battlefield kills. It gives them momentum. For the first time in this conflict, Ukraine is not just defending, it's dictating battle conditions. Small tactical victories translate into operational pressure on Russian formations, forcing them to defend more cautiously and cede initiative. And in war, initiative matters. So what comes next? The success of this strategy has broader implications for NATO and future conflicts. Heavy tanks may no longer be the blunt hammers of old, but as precision instruments integrated into advanced battlefield networks, they are lethal, and nations around the world are watching. And here's the final twist. While Russia still fields more tanks on paper, those numbers mean little if they can't be used effectively. Ukraine's strategy shows that a smaller force, used intelligently, can kill more enemy armor than a larger force used conventionally. That's the real shock. Even the United States, the birthplace of modern armored doctrine, is rethinking its assumptions, and Ukraine's challenger strategy is a big part of why. From the mud of eastern Ukraine, a lesson has emerged, one that will shape armored warfare for decades. Because this conflict proved something no one expected. Tanks didn't die on the modern battlefield. They just had to think differently about how they fight.